Government Business Order of the Day number 1, standing in the name of Mr Yan, the First Homeowner Grant Amendment Bill 2024, Serial 6, resumption of debate on the question that the bill now be read a second time.
I call the next speaker to speak in the debate. Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And on behalf of the Labor Opposition, we understand the importance of home ownership, Madam Speaker, and what it provides to Territorians, and particularly when we're looking at the sense of physical and emotional security and safety of a home, and particularly owning someone's own home can make a huge difference in those physical and emotional aspects of security and safety, Madam Speaker. We know that when it comes to first homeowner grants, Madam Speaker, that these can boost home ownership, reduce the debt burden for first home owned buyers, stimulate economic growth and make home ownership affordable for Territorians. Madam Speaker, the former Territory Labor government provided an election commitment around first homeowners, which was more generous in regards to targeting towards Territorians who are already living here in the Territory and focusing on building the Territorians who are already here building their very first home. Madam Speaker, I will say from the outset that we will support this bill, as we believe that working with the CLP government when it comes to the Territory's best interests is something that we're committed to do, and not being opposition just for opposition's sake and being disruptive, Madam Speaker. We are supportive that Territory-based first home owners are getting the option of either $50,000 for new builds or $10,000 for established homes. We hope that the new build component provides much needed stimulus to our construction industry, Madam Speaker, but particularly in the urban space. We know that we secured the $4 billion remote housing deal here in the Northern Territory for remote communities and homelands, and we're very proud of the work we've done previously in Labor. We know that the federal government's work around social and affordable housing across Australia also provides an opportunity for further housing construction in the particularly urban and regional space of the Territory, and we will support the work that those federal schemes offer the Northern Territory, and we do in turn, Madam Speaker, support more options for Territorians to have their first home. When in government, Madam Speaker, Territory Labor proudly introduced the house and land package exemption, and under this scheme, which is still active, Madam Speaker, it allows buyers of a house and land package to receive a stamp duty exemption. So again, work in all different facets of home ownership is something that we will focus on while we're in opposition, but we're happy that we have been able to contribute to more Territorians getting their own home previously when Labor was in government. Madam Speaker, this was a result of the Bringing Land to Market review that was held in 2021 in the last term, and when Labor was in government we worked with the housing construction industry to focus on the delivery, and this is something we will offer and extend to the industry whilst Labor is in opposition. Madam Speaker, first home owner grant schemes are meant to help even the playing field between first homeowners and existing homeowners who have lending advantages to owning their own property. While we are supporting this bill, Madam Speaker, it is of some concern that first homeowners could be competing to get a grant against buying their second, third, fourth or fifth home through the Fresh Start New Home Grant process, which the CLP government has introduced around providing existing home ownership with $30,000 to buy or build a new home. Madam Speaker, this scheme will only run for another 10 months, as we understand. I'm happy to be corrected by the CLP government if that's not the case, and we know that there is a cap on how many grants that can be paid in this scheme. It is simple but brutal reality that because of how the CLP have designed this particular scheme, Madam Speaker, every time a non-first home owner buyer receives public funds, a Territorian wanting to get their first home may miss out. We don't begrudge anyone who decides to access the scheme, Madam Speaker, in terms of the purpose of developing property portfolio, but if we're talking about first home ownership and rather than second, third, fourth home investment, we still believe that first home owners should be the priority, and we urge the CLP to focus on this in their design scheme. And if there are amendments after the 12-month expiry of the scheme, we would encourage the government to look at that as an option to really focus on allowing Territorians to own their first home here in the NT, which is what we all want. Madam Speaker, it's also disappointing that the CLP government has their third sittings to bring the legislation to the House. They did speak about this being a key priority, and we know that they've been able to jam down different legislation at different points. So we just believe this could have been debated in the first sittings, which was, I think, what a lot of people expected. But I would like to give the CLP government credit that they deserve, Madam Speaker, when we're talking about producing very good media releases about things that have not yet happened. It seems that the government has started paying out the grants scheme, Madam Speaker, before this legislation has passed before the House. So that's a bit of a baffling one, Madam Speaker. When we think about what the other processes are here, Madam Speaker, around the use of public funds and the work that the CLP has said that they'll do in government by being open and accountable. This is an area which I think would have been much more clearer in stepping out, because, as I mentioned, Madam Speaker, we've spoken a lot today already about the domestic, family and sexual violence prevention funding, the $180 million that would go to the domestic violence sector, and how that money could get rolled out very quickly. And the CLP government have said, no, that would be irresponsible for us as government to do that, and therefore we will not do that. We will look, review, analyse, blah, blah, blah. And then on the other hand, they're completely rolled out the homeowner grant scheme in this process. So there's no correlation into why they can do one bit of funding for one area of the community and not the other. So I would really love to hear from the Treasurer what the thinking is of that, because if we're talking about community safety and aspects to be able to support home ownership and maybe the safety of being in your own home, you would think that this could also be a really good twofold process that the CLP government could undertake to show that they've got some really great economic stimulus ideas and processes and schemes through a grant such as this that is being brought before the House. And on the same token, Madam Speaker, that you can roll out the family domestic sexual violence prevention money to the community where it's most needed. So the CLP does have that ability as government. They have done it already through this scheme, which we've seen, and we know that there's people who are benefiting already. But unfortunately, it's not a priority for them through the domestic family sexual violence prevention money, that they don't feel the same urgency and need to get that money out the door. So it would be good if the Treasurer can explain that in his wrap-up debate, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we've also failed to hear anything about the efforts of the CLP government that will make sure that the recipients of the public funds will spend it as required. We know the vast majority of Territorians, we believe, will do the right thing and satisfy the eligibility requirements of the grants. But we do know that there's no such thing as 100% compliance with the sums of money that we're talking about, Madam Speaker. Again, the CLP has promised to be diligent and accountable when it comes to every single territory dollar and cent, and ensuring that there is proper oversight of what is being spent. And more importantly, Madam Speaker, that the benefits of territory money is not just going to interstaters. We want to ensure that the territory money is best spent for Territorians, Madam Speaker, particularly if there's anyone who's looking to access the territory scheme who doesn't intend to move here to the territory, which I believe is one of the purposes of the scheme, Madam Speaker, and are just looking to build their own property portfolio from outside of the territory and take advantage of territory money, but not actually come and live and enjoy the beautiful territory lifestyle like the rest of us. Madam Speaker, by design, the CLP government is allowing interstate investors to tap into the scheme and access funding before they move to the territory, and it's great. We want incentives for more people to come and enjoy this beautiful territory that we all love. But it is a concern if the people that are accessing the scheme are not Territorians and not receiving the same benefit, or are competing essentially against that benefit? And do we see the investment taking over the original intention of the scheme, which is to have more Territorians own their first home, Madam Speaker? So I'd like to hear a bit more from the Treasurer around those processes. When we don't want to see Territorians disadvantaged with this scheme, essentially, Madam Speaker, when it boils down to it. So when we want to see the public funds that the Territory Government is investing through this scheme, we want to make sure that the pockets of the benefits for Territorians is Territorians. So if there isn't that process or compliance process that's undertaken, Madam Speaker, why not? And if there is a process of compliance, checking the criteria and the eligibility, can the Treasurer please explain that to the House in his wrap? That would be great as well. Madam Speaker, as I already said, despite all of the problems with the scheme, we'll still be supporting the bill, as we want to essentially see more Territorians own their first home. But we do want to see the CLP Government ensure that the jobs that are linked to the first home ownership scheme, that the public funds that are Territorian dollars are spent properly, and that they actually target Territorians to the fullest benefits possible, and not interstate people who are looking just to build their own personal property portfolio with no intention of staying in the Territory long term. Madam Speaker, access to affordable quality housing is central to many people's wellbeing. Owning a home ensures that our Territory communities and Territorians are more active in improving their local communities, that there's less transient movement across the Territory, and that we have people who stay in the Territory for longer term, that Territorians are more financially secure and better off to support their families and keep their families in a safe and secure home, and that Territorians ultimately are optimistic about the future because of having that ability to have their own home. Madam Speaker, we know there are a number of factors inhibiting first home owned buyers, the housing affordability to interstate rates to difficulties and securing finance. First homeowners grants are crucial, but we want to ensure that the CLP's new scheme is not potentially limiting the benefits of Territorians, as I've said. We do want to ensure that there's some type of checks and balance or review process to see that families or Territorian, even if they're individuals, do make it into the property market for the first time, and not just people who have already their own equity and assets and are just building their portfolio, as I mentioned a few times already, Madam Speaker. As with other grant announcements that we've already seen, Madam Speaker, from the CLP Government, this is another case of a one-off initiative that's aimed at, we think, headlines and grabbing votes. We want to make sure that the CLP Government also backs it up with a broader strategy and plan to systematically address the challenges facing people looking to get into their first home and the property market in general, and to ensure that they have safe, secure housing for themselves and their families, Madam Speaker. There is much more that could be done in this space. Really keen to see what the CLP Government will deliver in this space, and particularly when we're looking at social and affordable housing, Madam Speaker. So there's got to be that balance across the industry, and I'll be really interested to see what the plans are, and I believe through the Treasurer's other portfolio of housing construction, he may also be able to contribute to that in his debate wrapping up of his bill. Madam Speaker, while these grants may help some Territorians, there may be many who miss out, so we want to ensure that, again, the CLP can commit to Territorians that the first homeowner buyers will benefit ultimately first and foremost, and that we can look at really tackling the housing affordability challenges that are experienced, not just here in the Territory, Madam Speaker, but right across the Northern Territory. We're obviously seeing some of the stoush, the political stoush, I'd say, of the federal parliament at the moment. We've just heard this week that the National Greens have finally agreed to the federal Labor housing proposals, so I think that's a good step forward. obviously that's 12 months wasted that Australians right across the country will not benefit from. So it'll be interesting to see before the federal election, whenever that is, we don't know obviously, but whenever the federal election is there going to be a benefit in that housing space nationally from what's being done in federal parliament. So I'm very keen to see what the impact is here in the Territory. You know, there's a really great story around remote housing. Member for Barclay knows, Madam Speaker, that the remote housing story is very positive here in the Territory. So I think that that will continue to be a game changer in the NT under the new government as well, thanks to the deal that was secured by Territory Labor and Federal Labor. But the social and affordable housing is a big area of need, particularly in places like where I live in Katherine, and our regional centres, I know. So I will be supportive, Madam Speaker, and my team will be supportive in the Labor opposition of anything that can furthermore benefit Territorians around social and affordable housing, as well as our industry, because we know that we have a very invested industry in property and construction here in the Northern Territory. I met with the Property Council earlier this week, and they're the fastest developing and growing jurisdictional council in the country, and I think that's a testament to what's being worked on through the collaborative membership of the Property Council. So well done, and congratulations to the Property Council in that space. And very much looking forward to seeing what are the other levers that can be pulled in the Territory, particularly when we look at those federal schemes and the federal legislation or regulation that can benefit a place like the Northern Territory. We know that the processes of being able to release land in our regional centres, Madam Speaker, have also created some delays and tensions when we can't see more houses being built in regional centres like Alice Springs, like Tennant Creek, like Katherine. Obviously places like Nhulunbuy and Jabiru are quite different because of the changes of the mining lease and the tenure and the Office of Township Leasing, and the transfer between some of the statutory processes that are involved in those mining towns. I represent Groote Eylandt in the Arnhem electorate, so a place like Aliangoola, what will that present over the next couple of years when it comes to housing on Groote Eylandt in that township? It's still under the OTL, Office of Township Leasing, but what will the process be of the current stock there, or an ability to increase the stock in a place like Aliangoola? Jabiru's gone through its recent changes, Nhulunbuy's going through its transitional changes now, and they've got obviously a whole body of work and a pipeline of that transitional process for that mining town of Nhulunbuy, which is the hub for the East Arnhem region, as we all know, or should know, hopefully. So again, Madam Speaker, interested to see where the ability for someone wanted to buy a house in Jabiru, someone wanted to buy a house in Nhulunbuy, and in the future somewhere like Aliangoola on Groote Eylandt, where could some of this work that the CLP government is focusing on in this 12 months, where could that then lead to in terms of the medium and long-term plan of social and affordable housing, or housing investment, or housing growth and construction across the Territory, and not just the larger townships of Darwin, Palmerston, and Alice Springs. I'll put Alice Springs in that kind of larger town bucket as well. But Madam Speaker, I do appreciate the opportunity to contribute to this debate. I've asked some of the questions already, and I do hope the Treasurer is able to provide some responses when he does wrap the debate. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Nightcliff.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Safe to say, when the CLP announced this bill, a collective groan from economists could be heard across the country. It's a tired idea that has been shown time and time again to inflate property prices, making housing more unaffordable, further increasing the housing bubble. This bill benefits property developers, the construction industry and banks, while doing nothing to ease cost of living pressures for people who are renting and nothing to address homelessness. The bill benefits property developers and large construction firms because the largest grants are for purchasers or builders of new homes. The bill benefits the banks because the scheme creates an incentive for people to enter into huge mortgages by lowering the cost of the deposit that would otherwise be payable on the purchase of a home. There is a very real risk, as we've seen many times before with these grants, that we will see housing prices rise by $50,000 as a result of this grant. We will simply be funneling public money into the hands of banks, property developers, and given this bill puts no limit on house prices eligible for the grant, this is not targeting those seeking affordable housing, and this is key. So this does nothing to make housing more affordable for those who need it most, and in fact risks putting houses even further out of reach for the majority of the community. Meanwhile, we have an affordability crisis in the NT. Properties listed on the rental market in the NT are simply not affordable for people on disability support, pensions, for single parents on parenting or job seeker payments, for older pensions or the age pension, and for families barely earning the minimum wage. As one report noted, renters on low incomes are being left behind and forgotten in the private market. Renters are also being left behind and forgotten by the government. The wait times for public housing ranges from 4 to 10 years, depending on the type of property sought. We also have a homelessness crisis in the NT. The NT has 12 times the national rate of homelessness, with 16.5% of all Territorians under 18 experiencing homelessness, and 39% of people getting turned away from homelessness services due to lack of resources. This bill offers nothing to those who are doing it hard already across the Territory as far as housing is concerned. Many who are renting can't even imagine accumulating the capital required to pay a deposit on the purchase of a house. Many who are homeless can't imagine having the right amount of regular income to afford paying rent. We want affordable housing for all Territorians and for our community and economy to sustainably grow. But first home buyer grants are not the answer. They are a failed experiment. Australia's leading economists have consistently emphasised what works, and first home buyers grants are not on that list. For over 40 years, first home buyer grants have been rolled out across Australia. They've faced considerable criticism from economic experts at universities and independent think tanks. Just over the last decade, Australia has thrown more than $20 billion at these failed schemes, only to see affordability worsen. These grants don't help people into homes. They inflate housing prices further and they funnel public money into the pockets of property sellers. This is because first home buyer grants simply speed up the purchase and increase the price of purchase for those who are already about to buy, benefiting sellers and driving up prices. This has led economist Saul Eslake to suggest that they are more accurately described as second home vendors grants. As noted by the Reserve Bank of Australia Head of Economic Analysis, quote, "It is now widely accepted that policies that simply give people more money to spend on housing are likely to be capitalised into higher housing prices." And Dr. Chris Martin of UNSW City Futures Research puts it bluntly, quote, "First home buyer assistance measures add to demand, inflate prices and cost taxpayers billions," end quote. The CLP government therefore has a choice. Double down on a tired, ineffective strategy or take bold, decisive action to improving housing accessibility and affordability in the Territory. One option, end stamp duty and introduce a fair property tax. The Grattan Institute has shown that replacing stamp duties with broad-based property tax could save Northern Territorians up to $85 million every year. Unlike stamp duties, which discourage home purchases and lock people out of the market, property taxes are efficient, equitable and stable, exactly what our housing market needs. The CLP government must abandon ineffective, outdated policies and embrace evidence-based solutions. First home buyers grants are an expensive mistake that fail Territorians. Instead, focus on long-term structural changes that tackle affordability at its core. We need more truly affordable housing, not just giving money to those who can already afford it or people who just want to add to their property portfolios. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to respond to the proposed First Homeowners Grant Act. And while I understand the intent behind this bill and share the commitment to improving housing affordability, our economy and our population, this policy fails to address the real housing crisis in the Northern Territory: homelessness, lack of affordable rental options and limited social and public housing. Madam Speaker, this House must prioritise sustainable and effective solutions over quick fixes. While the first homeowners grant seeks to provide relief, we must ask ourselves whether it will achieve its intended outcome or simply push home ownership further out of reach for the very people it aims to help. We've heard a lot of information, from the member for Fong Lim in relation to research, and also some quotes, some research from the member for Nightcliff. And I agree with the member for Fong Lim. We don't need cookie cutter solutions. We need to do what will work for our economy and for our community. But in your own words, calculated risk and hoping do not fill me with confidence. We also heard in this chamber today, I applaud your commitment to research, but we heard in this chamber today from one of the ministers, the wonderful thing about research, figures and statistics is that you can pretty much make them say whatever you want.
Point of order. Mr. Speaker. Point of order, Fong Lim. Mr.
Standing Order 26, personal explanation, that's a misrepresentation and a conflation of two different sets of information.
No.
Absolutely is.
No, not a point of order. Continue on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the Northern Territory budget, we know we have limited funds, and this scheme is expected to cost Territorians over $200 million in the year that it runs. As we've noted, this is pretty much the same as the figure that we need to address domestic, family and sexual violence as a matter of urgency. There are far more effective ways to spend this money, not only in relation to that urgent issue, but also to address our housing needs in the Northern Territory. Decades of first home buyer grants and similar incentives have shown that these measures often do more harm than good. Instead of making housing more affordable, they inflate housing prices by enabling buyers to meet higher prices rather than addressing the underlying causes of housing inequality. And we've heard about lack of supply today. We've heard some of this information already on the floor from more than one speaker, but between 1965 and 2021, Australian government spent more than $38 billion on cash grants for first home buyers. Yet during this time, home ownership rates have steadily declined. The stark reality is that supporting people to pay higher house prices without tackling the root causes of housing inequality only worsens affordability. And while giving a bigger grant to people buying and building new homes seems like a step towards addressing supply, it risks creating bottlenecks in the construction sector, driving up the cost of building new homes. Australians saw this play out during the Morrison government's Home Builder program, where that initiative created a sudden surge of demand for builders and building materials. And since there were no more builders and materials magically created to meet that demand overnight, builders' limited time and limited resources became more valuable, pushing up the cost of both. And we've seen that as well here in the Northern Territory when there's been a push for rapid development. The way forward from here is not to double down on policies that history's shown are ineffective. Instead, as the member said, we need targeted, evidence-based solutions that directly address our issues here in the Northern Territory, including our issues of housing supply and affordability. Investing in social housing makes economic sense for our territory. Every dollar spent on building new social and public housing stimulates our local economy. It creates jobs and it reduces the long-term costs to our health and justice systems. By providing affordable, stable housing, we reduce pressure on emergency services, homelessness services and the health systems. We make our territory a more attractive place for people to come to and to stay in. The social return on this kind of investment is immense. I understand the desire to assist first home buyers and encourage home ownership, but we cannot ignore the broader picture. A $50,000 grant for new home buyers may temporarily boost the property market, but it does nothing to address the growing shortage of affordable houses for renters and those in need of social and public housing, and it risks inflating housing prices even further, making it harder for others to get a foot on the ladder while offering little to those who have no roof over their head right now. Madam Speaker, I encourage the government to prioritise long-term solutions to address the root cause of our housing crisis, not just quick fixes that benefit a select few. I believe by shifting our focus towards creating more affordable rental properties, social and public housing to meet the needs of the most vulnerable in our society, we can ensure that we build a strong, attractive economy here in the Northern Territory and that all Territorians, regardless of their income or circumstances, have access to a safe, secure and affordable place to live. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.